right, so get this. We're diving into this community in Siberia.
Okay.
And they're led by a guy, Vissarion, who says he's Jesus.
Oh, wow.
Not just a follower, not just like inspired by. He claims to be the actual reincarnation.
Wow. That's a bold claim when you consider, too.
Talk about a bold claim.
The remote location.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
This isn't like some flashy, well-publicized movement. This is Siberia, the wilderness.
Yeah. You've given us a ton of material on this. Excerpts from his book, The Last Testament.
Right.
Articles on like daily life there. And then on top of that, all the recent legal trouble they've run into.
Yeah. And it's that blend of the philosophical, like what we're going to talk about, and the real world.
Yeah.
How those things are intertwining that makes this so compelling, I think. We're unpacking not just what Vissarion believes, but how those beliefs actually manifest, in a real living, breathing community. And how, of course, the outside world reacts to that.
Right, because that always plays a part.
Always does.
So let's start then with the beliefs. What is, like, at the core of it? What's Vissarion putting out there?
So he believes humanity is in a very precarious position.
Okay.
Like on the verge of destroying ourselves.
Uh-huh.
Through, and this is a word he uses a lot, egoism. Yeah. And it's interesting because it's not just like a spiritual concept to him. He really sees this at the root of global problems, war, environmental destruction, all of it. He's pretty blunt about it. He writes, man is man's enemy. This is the global problem.
And I think that's something people can wrap their minds around.
Totally.
Even if they're not, into any spiritual kind of thing. You see that playing out in the news all the time.
Every day.
So what's the solution? If that's the problem, what's Vissarion's solution to this very human problem?
Well, he doesn't offer some, like, Band-Aid solution.
Right.
He says we need a complete spiritual awakening, like a radical shift in consciousness. And it's one that rejects, that's really key, the pursuit of material wealth. And instead embraces unity, love, selfless service to the community. These are all like big themes for him.
And that's where his idea of like recognizing our weaknesses comes in, right?
Yeah.
I was struck by this line from the text. I have not come to judge you, but to help you. I mean, this is Vissarion we're talking about, right? But what way you will use this, that is how you alone will judge yourselves.
Wow.
It's like self-awareness is key here.
It's huge. It's really a central theme in his teaching. He's not advocating for blind faith, or just like obedience to him. He wants his followers to actively engage in their own spiritual growth.
Oh.
And that begins with understanding your own flaws.
Yeah.
And how those flaws impact the community as a whole.
Right.
So it's really interesting.
Yeah. It's like, how does that actually work?
Right.
Like, how do these really abstract ideas about egoism and spiritual awakening, how does that translate to building a life in a community in Siberia?
Well, it seems like they've created it's kind of wild. It's like a blend of traditional rural living.
Okay.
But then also what you might call like new age spirituality.
Okay.
So big emphasis on self-sufficiency. Like they're growing their own food, building their own homes. A lot of the articles talk about like they make their own clothes. It's very much about like living sustainably in harmony with nature.
But it can't be all like farming and meditation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned Vissarion. He was a painter before all this.
Yeah, yeah.
Even won an award.
He did. He won an award in Moscow, actually, for his art.
See, now that's interesting. And the articles mention like artistic expression is actually encouraged there.
It's huge.
Yeah.
They're big on, it seems like from what we're seeing, creativity is just as important as, practicality. So music, visual arts, crafts, all that. It kind of feeds into this whole vision they have of a life that's not just about survival.
Right, right.
It's about building something beautiful together and meaningful. And you're right to bring up his art background. I mean, it adds a whole nother layer.
Totally. It's like, this isn't just some,
right,
spiritual leader who's, removed from the
exactly. This is someone who we know understands the creative impulse that human need to express.
Yeah. And yet with this focus on beauty and unity and all that, things take a turn.
They do.
2020, Vissarion is arrested.
Yeah. And that's where I think the picture gets a lot more...
murky.
Yeah. Murky is a good word for it. Complicated.
Yeah.
Because the accusations against him and his followers, they're serious, alleging emotional harm, manipulation. Some are even saying exploitation.
So from what I understand, authorities are claiming that he used his position to, control his followers.
Essentially.
Cut them off from the outside world, and it caused, they're saying significant psychological distress.
Right.
Which, how do you even prove that?
That's the thing. Proving that kind of harm, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And it really, I think, brings up these bigger questions about, like, okay, how do we define and measure emotional harm?
Right.
Particularly in a community that has chosen to live outside what we consider, mainstream norms.
Right.
Where do we draw the line between a freely chosen alternative lifestyle and something that's actually harmful to the people in it?
And we have that excerpt, right, from his courtroom speech. And I gotta say, his words are striking. He seems genuinely perplexed by all this. Yeah. Claims he never forced anyone to do anything.
Right.
He even says at one point, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what are my friends and I serving a year's sentence for? As in essence, such imprisonment cannot be anything else.
Wow.
It's wild.
You can, just from reading that, you can kind of understand the confusion, at least from his perspective.
Right.
He creates this community based on all these shared values, love, unity, spiritual growth. He sees himself as a guide,
right,
a teacher, not someone who manipulates or abuses people.
Right.
But, the legal system's coming at this from a very different lens.
Of course.
And I think that's where the real conflict lies.
Totally. It's kind of what happens when those two worlds collide,
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what about the community, right?
Yeah.
Their leader's been taken away, imprisoned. So how are they doing?
Well, from the articles, it seems like they're definitely struggling.
Yeah.
But they're also, pushing back. They're trying to raise awareness, appealing to, human rights organizations, that kind of thing.
Right. Trying to keep it going.
Yeah. But it's got to be an uphill battle at this point.
Absolutely. It makes you think about that word he uses, egoism.
Oh, yeah.
He sees it as this, destructive force in the world. Right.
Okay.
But, isn't it possible that egoism is playing a role on both sides of this whole thing?
Oh, totally. And I don't think it's always conscious either,
Exactly.
Yeah. It's on the one hand, you've got his teachings, right, condemning egotism, emphasizing the collective.
Right.
But then you have these accusations, that maybe even someone who preaches those ideals so strongly can still get caught up in those very things.
Absolutely. It's almost a case study in, how complex people are.
Right.
The human experience.
We all have egos, even the people who, dedicate their lives to,
right,
getting past them, I guess.
It reminds me of something else he said in that courtroom speech. He seems so confused, Yeah. How could my teachings, which are all about love, he says, and unity, how could that be seen as harmful?
Right.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because when you're in it, when you're living within that system, it probably doesn't feel coercive.
Right.
It feels like truth.
Right.
It feels like the way to live. And I think that's really important to remember. Perspective is everything.
Totally.
And what seems strange or even wrong from the outside can feel completely different when it's your reality.
100%. This deep dive has been full of twists and turns.
It really has.
And I feel like we're left with more questions than answers.
And maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the point. Not every story has this neat and tidy ending, right?
Right.
Sometimes the best thing we can do is just sit with the not knowing.
Yeah.
Admit that we don't have it all figured out.
Right.
And just stay curious,
Yeah, that's a good place to leave it. So for our listeners, if you're ready to go even deeper on this, we've got links to the community's website, some of their YouTube channels, all that good stuff.
Yeah, check it out. It's fascinating to hear these stories firsthand and come to your own conclusions based on what they have to say.
There you go. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Vissarion and the Siberian community.
Quite a story.
A story of faith, community, and like we were just saying, just how complex the human experience really is.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep asking those questions.
And dive deep.